So why don't we get this show on the road, since we always find that the conversations are fascinating, but we always want more time. Welcome, everybody. I'm Kurt Gutjahr with the Center of the American West. I'm the managing director there, and you are attending Celebrating Creativity in the Craft, Historians Imagine, featuring B. Erin Cole this month. This monthly webinar features Patty Limerick and Matt Jacobson in conversation with path-breaking historians about the inventiveness and vision of their work. We are recording this webinar, so you will be able to access it on our webpage afterwards. We will not record the Q&A session for the webpage, but this will be on there. And it's also being streamed on Facebook Live, so you could also access it there. The series came about, our origin story is great. It came about because Patty and Matt did a session at the Western History Association last October on the role of creativity, and that was extremely well intended, but it was also attended by a graduate student named Kate Carpenter, who basically came to us and said, hey, why don't you do a monthly series? And hence, Historians Imagine was born. So thank you, Kate Carpenter, for bringing us that fabulous idea. I'd also like to do a quick shout out to our center staff that makes this all possible. Honey Aschenbrenner, our marketing and communications person, Lisa Cooper, who's doing the back end. She will be posting the Zoom link for the Q&A session, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. Valerie Albicker, Quinn Precourt, Kevin Turong, Kelly Turong, and of course, Brian Bishop, who helps us put on these webinars every week. Thank you all for all your hard work. And we have 3 more coming up in this series. On April 15th, we will feature Jenny Price from Washington University. May 12th, we'll have Phil Deloria from Harvard. And June 9th, we'll have Natalia Molina from USC. And then the center also has additional events that we're doing. This coming Friday, we have an event featuring Patty in conversation with the local director, the CU's director of the Center for Humanities and Arts, Jennifer Ho, and they will talk about what it means to disagree. And probably they'll cover a lot of other things, things that are going on in our common cultural milieu. So please join that. That's an hour-long program. And then on April 15th, we have a Bipartisanship and Friendship Happen event. It's part of our new series where we focus on friendships of people across the aisle. This will feature CU President Mark Kennedy, who served in Congress as a representative as a Republican from Minnesota, and University of Massachusetts President Marty Meehan, who served at Congress in the same time as President Kennedy, and they formed a friendship together, and he was, of course, a Democrat from Massachusetts. So that's April 15th. You can go to our website and get all the registration information you need there. A couple pieces of housekeeping. As I mentioned, we have a post-session Q&A. We are putting the Zoom link in the Q&A. You can still provide feedback during the course of the program, but the post event will be really more an open conversation because it'll appear as a meeting space rather than as a straight Zoom webinar. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand this off to Matt, but I'll be back in a few minutes to run the tech part of it when we do the slides.
Great. Thank you, Kurt. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all here. I will just offer a brief our brief little philosophical statement at the outset. Our premise here is straightforward, but richer than you might think, and it is twofold. The first premise is that history writing, history exhibiting, historical thinking is a magisterial creative act, and that the work that we tend to respond to as historians is the work that's the most creative. If you think about your favorite historians, look at your bookshelves, the people you really love are really creative people. But we don't tend to talk about the craft that way. We talk about rigor, we talk about argumentation, we talk about evidence. We kind of crush the life out of it when we talk about it, especially in the classroom. So our first premise is that it's worth talking about the creativity piece. And the second premise is that when you do that, when you pull creativity forward and really think about it as one of the foremost parts of the work that we do, you learn all kinds of things about the work that are very difficult to get to otherwise. And so that's why we're here. With that, I will throw it to Patty Limerick, who will introduce our guest today.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for making this happen. Really, when I think about how tedious life would be if but as it is, really, I've been so energized by having this collaboration go. And it has been so fun picking our participants for this, and really just being happy beyond words when we made our invitations and people responded right away and said yes. In this case, we have really strong suit of Colorado-ness going for us here, and that will not cause me to make a case for Colorado having a bigger claim on creativity, because that would not be well supported. As I look at all the participants here who are from different places, I should not do that. And there you are, but you're from Colorado too, Matt, and now you live in Massachusetts, but excuse me, Connecticut, excuse me. But you've so transcended that and stayed Coloradan even in your exile. So that's really good. So our speaker today is Erin Cole, and she is, well, it got to be very interesting. I'm just going to tell you she's from Grand Junction, but there are a lot of geographical subtleties in that statement. There are tiny little zones, I'm not even sure I would call them towns, that knowledgeable people would recognize, and she can speak of that if she wants or not. But Grand Junction in some relationship to Palisade, but not Palisade, so very complicated, but instructive. We learned a lot about Colorado from asking Erin, where are you from? Because we just get to know places we wouldn't know so well otherwise. She went to Colorado Mesa University, graduated from there, but in a manner, I've decided that we'll call her our undercover agent in scoping out higher education in Colorado, because she attended 4 other universities before she settled on that one. So she was at University of Denver, she was at CU Denver. So she was sort of our, could you just be a student and just go observe and watch how they conduct themselves there? So we're going to start that program up again at Southern American West. We're not going to call them spies, we would never do that, but we'll call them our observers. So that's actually a wonderful way to go to college, I think, because then you really get to keep adjusting to where you are. She went to the University of New Mexico for her PhD. She wrote a dissertation that involves urban planning issues in Denver. And so that we might hear a tiny bit about that. Then she became the History Colorado Assistant State Historian, where she worked with Bill Convery, who was the state historian who's with us today, which is very cool, and who did a fine job. Both of them did great work there. And then she left History Colorado and she went to the Minnesota Historical Society, where she has been since then. She has a gift that I wouldn't even know what it would be like to have, but boy, does she take our process of creativity with this gift of cartooning and taking ideas and expressing them with graphics and with verbal sharpness. It's not all about the drawing. It's really getting the words that are utterly compatible with the project of the drawing. So why don't I shut up about describing something that you're about to see, and you'll know a little bit about why. There's a little indication of why I'm so excited that we were about to have, we'll open with some of the material that she has, some of the work she has done. Hard to use the word work, but it is work, and I know that doesn't just happen. Work. Yeah. So ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Dr. Erin Cole. Here she is.
Hello, everybody. First off, thank you, Patty, and thank you, Matthew, for inviting me to be part of this. I mean, like what you said at the beginning, Matt, is really true. We don't talk about creativity in history all that often. It's about like, here is my sources, here is things like that. But the actual like creating up of something is something that we don't talk about a whole lot. So since I don't really have books to point out or everything like that, I do have a kind of quick presentation of some of my work that I have to share with you. So all right. So anyway, so again, my name is Erin Cole. I'm a historian. I'm a museum professional and I'm a cartoonist. So that was pre-pandemic hair in that photo. So you can go to the next slide, Kurt. So as you kind of gathered from Patty's introduction, I actually did train as an academic historian. I have a PhD in the history of the American West from the University of New Mexico, but my professional career has been spent in museums, specifically large state history museums. And I was at History Colorado in Denver from 2010 to 2015. And I have been at the Minnesota Historical Society from 2015 to the present. So, and my job at both those places was basically exhibits focused. I create exhibits. I create immersive narrative experiences that link past and present. And, I've worked on a very, very wide variety of different topics over my 10 years in museums, ranging from like my last big exhibit that I opened was about the history of the Minneapolis music scene and Prince. But I've also done exhibits on the Chicano movement in Colorado. I've worked on exhibits about the Ludlow massacre. I did an exhibit about the environmental history of Colorado. So I basically, like, even though I have like like an academic specialty, I'm very much a generalist in my museum work. The thing I know, like, that I really specialize in is knowing how to create kind of immersive environments that are visual, emotional, and kind of draw on all the senses to basically like link visitors with history. So you can change slides. So I'm also a cartoonist. I have actually been drawing cartoons off and on since I was a kid. And I kind of stopped for a long time and got back into it actually after I started working in museums. Because again, like, there's a lot of things that are similar between doing a museum exhibit and doing a comic. It's very visual. You're kind of luring people from like one part of the exhibit to another part of the exhibit, the same way you're kind of luring people in from going to one page to another. It's a mix of text and visual. So I started doing comics again when I was at History Colorado. And what you're seeing on the screen here is actually a cartoon I did about how to do exhibits, which was published in Contingent magazine. It was one of their first pieces. So what you see here is like, and like all of my exhibits are available online, and I can post the links at some point, is me just kind of explaining like, here's what I do as a historian, and here's what an exhibit is like. So just me on the first, on the kind of the left side saying, hi, I make exhibits for history museums, I have a PhD in history. And then the second one is actually probably the most hard-worn thing I've ever drawn, which is about the typical exhibit experience that somebody spends 10 minutes in and then goes to the bathroom. So anyway, so you can advance a slide, Kurt. So, but I've also done a lot of other, that was my first kind of really like history focused comic, but I've done a couple of other, quite a few things since. So what you're going to see here, and I think we're going to talk, I think Patty and Matthew and I are going to talk about this a little bit. This is from a comic I did last fall called Am I Still a Historian? Which talks about the fact that, even though I work in the field, even though I have a PhD in history, I still think about the fact that, am I actually a historian? And you can advance the slide here, Kurt. That we have specific ideas of what a historian does. They teach in a university, they are on the tenure track, they have a book, they probably will have several books, and I don't have any of those things. And so just like, as you know, like academia really makes people feel inferior all the time. But just kind of the fact of being in the position where I'm still kind of very active in the field, but not in a traditional way. And so this comic talks a lot about kind of the doubts that I have. And there's one more slide in this. So, and this is kind of where, this is almost like the thesis statement of this, like, I don't have an academic job, I don't have a current research job, and most importantly, I don't have a book. Because again, like, that's how historians talk to each other, is with the book. So, and then one more slide. I'll show you one other example. So this is another exhibit. This is another cartoon that I did for Contingent that came out last fall, which is about me taking a tour to the Nevada test site as part of the Western History Association conference in 2019. So this is just kind of, the larger comic is kind of a meditation on place. It's a meditation on how, like, as a historian, we think about place. And it's also kind of like, it touches on a couple of themes about kind of being home, and being in basically being in the landscape that you call home, that I actually have, that I'm using this comic to develop some other kind of larger projects. But this one, I also just like, we all know what being on a bus of historians is like. It's like basically a bus of snark. So that's kind of something that comes out in this. So this is the first panel, and then there's one more, I think, in my part of this. And then this is just a little bit about the actual tour itself, the fact that we had to go, there's all of this rigmarole and things you have to go actually go out and go to this incredibly sad and tragic place where you have a tour guide that doesn't really want to tell you anything important, but they'll tell you about the steaks they served at the officers club. So that's some of my work, and I can drop links to those pieces in the chat at some point. So, but that's actually like, so I've been, starting to do a lot more comics work in addition to my museum work. I have a couple of projects that are, kind of longer form projects that I'm working on that we can, talk about and I'll hope maybe talk about, but rather than just kind of, like, let me show you my work, why don't we just kind of like, let's actually have I'm really curious to see where this conversation goes. So, anyway, that's kind of a brief introduction to my comics work.
Wonderful, Erin. Thank you so much. So, Matt, do you want to start us off with
Sure.
Matt has been doing interviews, so he knows the drill, and he starts with the why'd you want to be a historian?
Yeah,
Right?
why this? Yeah, so let's go back to your pre-museum, pre-cartooning past, and I would love to hear you just reflect on what were you doing, where were you, what were you reading, who were your influences, who were your mentors when you first started to imagine that scholarship in general, but history in particular, might be a place for you and might be a vehicle for your own passions and your interests, and could actually kind of carry who you wanted to be into the world. How did that happen for you?
Well, I'm trying to think, like, there's not really a clear path that I can point to, but I think that's really common for a lot of historians. And I mean, I think the clearest answer I can give is the reason I wanted to become a historian is I wanted to know why things worked the way that they did, and how things came to be. And I'll be honest, like, I didn't actually think about becoming a historian or going to history graduate school until like very late in my very complicated undergraduate career. So I actually wanted to be a journalist when I, graduated from high school and started college, as I wanted to be a journalist. And I actually was for a little bit. I worked for the Denver Post, not doing anything particularly exciting or glamorous, but I did get to work in the newsroom and, but kind of getting, but just even though I got out of journalism for various reasons, I still had that idea, how did this place come to be? And a lot of my questions had to do with like the built environment, the relationship between land and people. So I kind of, basically like when I actually became an academic, went into academic history, I definitely went to kind of both environmental and urban history at the same time. But when I went back to finally finish my undergraduate degree at Mesa State, which is now called Colorado Mesa. I became a history major because I had a lot of history credits, and it was a thing that was going to get me to graduate easily. So, which, I mean, this doesn't really sound like the beginning of a promising history career, but anyway, I started taking history classes, and I think, having, like experience as a journalist, experience just being out in the world made me kind of thinking like, this is actually a way that I can think of that, here's some tools that I can use to not only try to explain my own place in the world, my community's place in the world, but also kind of, like teach and educate others. So I started, when I was at Mesa, I took a couple of classes with Steve Schulte, who I think is here, and, realized that I really liked researching, and I liked writing. And so I decided to go to grad school, even though I actually had a job where I made money, but I decided to go to graduate school anyway. And, that's, that's kind of how I got to that part. And I was very, very lucky when I was in graduate school that I, worked with people who were very narrative driven, that, being able to research is important, knowing knowing kind of like your theoretical underpinnings is important. But I mean, like my advisor, Virginia Scharf, was always just like, just tell me what the story is. Like, don't bore me, tell me what the story is. So I very much came out of graduate school, not only with this kind of sort of tools to analyze kind of place and environment and space, but also kind of a very strong sense of don't bore people, which really is if you're going to do anything, that is the worst thing you can do in a museum exhibit, is bore people. So again, I didn't actually plan on working in museums at all. I kind of, I wanted to write and I wanted to teach and things like that, and then kind of fell into museum work along the way. And that's, but in some ways, when I actually got to museum work, I was like, all right, this is actually brings together all of the things that I like and that I'm good at in one thing. So, but I mean, like, that's how the history part started.
Yeah. That's one of the things I love about the piece that you showed us a few panels of, the bus full of historians traveling through the desert to think about atomic waste. Because it's in some ways, it's the answer to the question, am I still a historian? And the answer is, being a historian is actually a way of being in the world. It's a way of just kind of, it's the way you react to things. It's the way you think about things. It's like your kind of innate temperament about the kinds of questions you want to ask. And I thought that's exactly what came out in your answer to my initial question. And it's like, it's less about the book. It's less about the research. It's more about a way of being in the world and a kind of exploration and a kind of a spirit, I guess, of exploration.
Yeah, like, I don't think any of us can turn it off. So regardless of what we're doing, it's just like, oh, let me tell you about this. And people are like, oh God, they're doing that again. So
that actually connects very much to the question I was obviously very eager to ask here, which is beautiful phrase there. There's not a question, a statement. Don't bore people. Beautiful phrase. 3 words, really good. I hope you'll do a drawing that supports that or works with that sometime. Why do some historians bore people? And be very discreet and very diplomatic as you answer this, and don't name names, probably don't name names, but what a curious thing. If they wanted to be historians and they had something that they were going to share, where does the boringness come from? Because I just think that's so much the center of why some are going in the creative direction and some are not. So could you reflect in the kindest, most compassionate way, why do some people think, okay, well then I will be boring?
Well, I think first off, like, there's a lot of legitimate ways of being a historian and being in the world. Like, you know, even books that I find like, all right, this isn't really about a story. This is about theoretical analysis. This is about something. Do useful things, and they're all part of the building blocks that we use to do the work that we do. And we need, like, I mean, we need that as well. But my experience, and I can actually talk to this a little bit because I have a lot of experience working with historians in museums. And I think some of that is like when so first off, like when I'm working on an exhibit, the first thing that we kind of ask is like, first off, who is this for? You know, who is the audience? Who are we, like, who do we want to get in the door? Who's already coming in the door? What do they want? What do they need? And, you know, and like, sometimes when I talk to people outside the field in this, they're just like, oh, you just want to give people what they want. And first off, like, there's nothing really wrong with that in the first place, as long as you're also challenging them and doing things like that. But it's more about kind of thinking about, like, most of my career has been, like, professional career has been thinking about how to do history for people who are not just like me. And, you know, in some ways, like, I can't necessarily get away from myself in my work, my comics. Like, I would totally read my comics, but my museum work is about other people, and it's about feelings, and it's about affect and other things. And sometimes when I work with other historians in a setting, like we have them as like advisors on exhibits, first off, I think a lot of people are very much used to the teaching mode, that they are the person that is teaching somebody some things. That, you know, it's, you know, like, as we know, like, lectures are a form of discourse. They're a way to formulate your thoughts. You know, I've lectured, you know, things like that. But, you know, like, when I'm, you know, like, museums, like, basically museum exhibits are like basically they're recreational activities. People come because they want to get out of the house. They're not coming for a grade. They're not coming for things. So I think in some ways people, like, that's very much kind of like the mode of discussion that we're really used to as historians, is I talk and you write that down. And then, you know, or, you know, maybe, and although I mean, I do know a lot of people who do a lot of really interesting and creative things in the classroom, it's still very much like, it's like, I am talking and you are getting a grade. So I think there's that. And then just also, like, you know, like, thinking about the book as a platform for discussion is that, you know, no matter like how awesome your book is, it still takes a lot of time and energy to read a book. That it's, you know, and you're trying to do a lot of things. You're trying to kind of like place yourself in the literature, you're trying to do something, advance something new, you're trying to kind of take, as we know, like something that may or may not have made sense to the people who are living through it and put some order to it. And like, I think like this way, like I don't do, like if I did an exhibit on something I knew a lot about, I would have a hard time getting out of those details. Like, oh, you know, you need to do this and this and this and this and this. But as somebody who is more concerned about like, how do we take this complicated thing and turn it into like a couple of ideas and convey this in a way that's emotional and engaging, you know, in the end, like what I'm interested in is the emotional impact of this on people coming through the door. I'm interested in whether or not they're, you know, when they're in an exhibit, they're talking with their friends. Are they engaging with what I'm doing? Are they touching things? Are they, you know, I think museums have really forced me to think a lot about, you know, I don't know if it's like, because like, I mean, like I've seen a lot of boring exhibits. We've all seen a lot of boring exhibits. There's nothing inherently non-boring about museums, but just thinking about engagement is like, it's very different in a museum. And that's something I had to learn a lot on the job is, you know, coming in is like, well, let me tell you about this. And they're just like, all right, people don't want to know about that, but they're interested in this. How can we connect those two different things? So sometimes I think there's not, you know, I've had to think a lot about how to like engage people and how to bring them in the door and get them excited and take pictures of things and put on social media. So in some ways, I don't necessarily think that it's necessarily that historians are going like entirely trying to be boring. It's just like there's, you know, put it this way, there's not really, you know, when your audience is people who are basically just like you, or people with the same like level of kind of engagement or education, you don't like, engagement is different at that level than it is for, we don't know who's coming in the door. People might just coming to see this because it's warm out, or it's warm in here and it's cold out there. And so I think it's I don't know, like I feel it was fairly diplomatic, but I think it's just like, it's a different way of thinking about reaching people and what does it mean to like learn and what does it mean to like understand information.
Right, and I guess I just have to push one level more though and just say, wouldn't the whole profession gain if they knew what you knew? And
Probably.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but I also can't write anything longer than 50 words. So I mean, like that's the like way my brain is atrophied after working in museums, is that 100 words is that's a lot of writing.
Well, yeah, I love what you're saying though about the kind of the lecturing, not just the lecturing mode of discourse, but the lecturing impulse, because it has to do with how we wear our authority.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the book comes in. Like the book is, I mean, as much as we love books, we love other people's books, we love our own books some days. But the book is also the thing that keeps us the most tied to the institution, right? It's the thing that is like charts your progress through the profession. It's the thing that you're judged by. It's the thing that keeps you tied to the institutional aspect of the university. And I think that what you're saying about feeling, you know, jarring loose from that way of wearing one's authority as a historian is, I mean, I think that authority is one of the things that gets in our way. I think when we're at our best, history thinking and history writing is closer to a jazz improvisation than it is to a classical score. And I think it's the authority of the book and the authority that the institution kind of forces upon us is the thing that keeps us from jamming sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll say that, like, you know, as somebody who usually every time I do an exhibit, like I get a new project, like I realize I don't actually know that much about it. It's not, you know, like, hey, you're our curator of X. Can you do this thing about the thing you know a lot about? It's like, we want to do this. It's your project. Go figure out who knows stuff about it. So normally when I'm doing an exhibit, it's, you know, connecting with the people who know things, realizing that I am not the authority on this. Like in some ways I do have authority. I represent the institution. I control budgets. I can talk a lot about how we take all of this. and turn it into something that is engaging. But in the end, I'm usually working with people who know a lot more about the topic than I do, who, you know, whether they're other scholars, but more likely they're like activists or community members or, you know, journalists or other things. I'm often just like kind of like, hey, like I'm here to help us figure out how to tell this story, but you're actually the experts on this story. And that is also a big like shift from what I learned, you know, in grad school. And like, you know, in some ways, like it's kind of in some ways affected, like when I actually think about like possibly doing something with my academic work, I'm like, how do I even know this is true? Like there's a lot of people who know more about this than me. So in some ways you know, it's you know, like just being like going to places and knowing that you don't know anything about anything is actually it kind of puts things in perspective.
I get us over to cartoons.
Sure.
I have the underpinning be that if more academic historians could experience the pleasure of doing an exhibit well and watching people in the exhibit enjoying themselves,
Mm-hmm.
I would assume that is a great way of getting high. I've had it once or twice myself, but it seems like a wonderful way of thinking, whoa, look at them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could talk about getting high, if you don't mind using that term, on doing an exhibit well that enlivens and engages, and then get to the doing cartoons and the I would assume exhilaration. That would be my notion. If I could do it, that I would feel that. So you talk about the rewards and satisfactions of these different forms of expression, and how down the road we might get to how could we let other historians know that there is a wonderful world of stimulus and excitement waiting for them with significant labor behind that. So, okay, talk about delightful experiences you have had with successfully and creatively set up exhibits, and then get us to how the cartoon thing started happening and the pleasures that's delivered.
Mm-hmm. So that's actually a really good question to ask, because like in some ways, like that's the payoff, is like I get to see people moving through a space that I designed collaboratively, working with a whole lot of other people, because like every project I do in a museum is highly collaborative. You get to see people like stop and look at things. You get to see them like talk about them with their friends. You get to see you know, people posting things on social media. You get to like there's like a kind of a very like like I've written things before and you get feedback, but it's different when you're actually watching a person doing that. It's it's very and just like having I've done a couple of very community focused events. We're just thinking even at the opening, just the amount of people coming in and just seeing themselves in that a space they didn't imagine they'd ever see themselves in, and I know that there's a little bit of like, well, they did this because like this is happening because I made it happen, but at the same time, like I also know all of the work that everybody did to bring all that together. So it is like there's a payoff, there is definitely an emotional payoff that I never got when I was teaching, even though I did like teaching. It's just kind of like people are having a good time, and that's because of something I made, and maybe they're learning something because again, like in some ways, like one of the things that I've kind of I've gotten out of museums and kind of put into comics is like learning is about feeling. It's not about like, let me tell you these things. It's about like I am creating something where somebody feels like either happy enough or they're like comfortable enough or something like that to kind of open themselves up to learning something new. So anyway, so like I will be honest, like one of the things that I do like about cartoons is first off, like much like museums and exhibits where you get a very different audience, I do the comics that I do have reached places that I never thought they would. And I will be honest, like, I was like, who wants to read a comic about like putting together museum exhibits or like going to the Nevada test site or anything like this? But again, like, if you're enthusiastic enough about something, people will also be enthusiastic about it. So like doing comics has first off reached a lot of people that I never thought I'd actually reach with anything. I mean, certainly more people that would ever read anything I put in a journal or anything like that, but also just kind of like you know, like, I mean, one thing that comics can do that is very much like an exhibit is like, it's, you know, like you're looking and you're reading and you're feeling all at the same time. You know, like the page is like doing a bunch of work for you that, you know, is very different than just reading, you know, book. And sometimes that can like, you know, increase people's kind of like affective like reaction to something. Sometimes it's just like, oh, you know, like it just kind of like cartoons can do a lot of things that other media can't. And I mean, like, I'll be honest, like, and this is the thing that you know, sometimes people are like, hey, I'd really like to start drawing cartoons. And I'm like, that's great. That's awesome. You should start doing, like, first of all, I think anyone who is interested in doing it should. I do have the caveat that I've been writing comics since I was like 6. And I also like, you know, like I actually have almost an art degree as well. So, and my mom was an artist. So I actually do have a lot of kind of the, you know, even though my drawing is very, very spare and simple, like I do actually have a lot of art training, which is, but that doesn't mean that, you know, like people shouldn't try that. It's like, I sometimes like, I feel like sometimes people are like, well, you just started drawing. I'm like, yes, but I've also been like reading comics for basically my whole life. So, and I've been drawing for a long time as well. But just being able to bring all of those things together, and again, I don't think museums made me a better cartoonist just because like there's really strong parallels between the two. But it is just kind of like seeing the people react to the things I've drawn has been like kind of, you know, like again, like I would never, first off, like I mean, like I got invited to be on this thing, so like that just feels like I drew a cartoon brain blob, and here I am. So
right, and I just have one really quick follow up on this, which is, could you just, and this can be very arbitrary, and you can reconsider it for days to come, but what are the 2 cartoons that drawing it made you the happiest?
Of my own?
Yes.
Or
yeah. And again, don't think that you have to answer that for all time, but just 2 cartoons that when you did them, you thought, I have an excellent situation in life.
I don't really know.
Just that brain in the bed right at the start might be.
Yeah, I mean, like I'll be honest, like I can definitely tell when I draw something that is extremely pleasurable to look at, because I just kind of get this like feeling. But a lot of the drawings I really like that I do are not actually in cartoons. It's just stuff in my sketchbook. But I'm trying to think about, like, you know, for the Am I Still a Historian one, like I think there's so many of the panels in that. And again, like we should probably at some point link to these in the chat. So maybe we can do that in the after event. But it's just being able to kind of like realize that I'm like, okay, this is something that's actually really complex. There's a bunch of layers of identity. There's a lot of things in here. And like, I'm actually drawing something that puts those into a visual, it visualizes that. And if you think about like all of the work that's doing, like, it's actually pretty complex work. And I'm just like, good job, me.
So ask the same question but different, which is, when you're on the bus tour, and there's a person who's leading the tour, and he's not totally attuned to he's completely unattuned to what historians are going to be like, and you're with all your historian pals, and at what moment in that lived experience do you think this is going to be a cartoon?
Well, first off, I didn't think that. But I was actually, first off, we weren't allowed to take photos at the test site. We weren't allowed to bring phones, but I did have my sketchbook with me. So I did a lot of doodles while we were talking. And so, because that was like the only way I was going to be able to record of what was going on. So I actually had like a whole lot of sketches from that. And I wasn't planning on turning it into a cartoon, but you know, a lot of times it just takes a couple of months or years, and you're just like, I think this could work. I think this could actually be a thing. And so for the test site comic, I actually started working on it about a month later, mostly because I was just like, what the hell was that? Like, that was just trying to put some sense to like, what did we see? That was so strange. You know, like kind of the juxtaposition of like having this tour guide tell us these really innocuous things, and then you're just like, oh my god, they bombed a bunch of pigs to see what happened to their skin. And it was just kind of everything at once. And so in some ways I was trying to actually just kind of explain myself what had happened. And then I kind of stopped working on it, and then COVID happened, and eventually, like, I got furloughed at work last year for 10 weeks, and I was just like, you know what, I bet I could actually, like, I kind of felt like I had more perspective on that tour, and I'm like, I bet I could turn that into a cartoon. And so I actually talked to Erin, my editor at Contingent, to see if they would be interested in it, and she's like, yes. And so finished it. And like, it was weird because like I actually had a couple of different reading groups for that. I had a historian reading group, like a couple of friends of mine who do atomic history and things like that, but I also had a comics reading group of people who are just like, where is the test site? You know, like, who are just not historians, especially not Western historians. And so that was actually super helpful, because they're just like, so what is this? And so like between the two groups, you know, people are going like, hey, I actually think you got the date wrong on this, or what if we use this task versus this one? And then other people are just like, we bombed pigs. And so just kind of having those two groups come together was a really kind of help. Like, I mean, like, it's just really helpful to get that feedback from a lot of different audiences.
One of the things I love about that piece is that, I mean, it's so spare that it actually allows you to see the resonances with other experiences. So I feel like, oh, I've been on that tour. You know, I haven't been on that tour. I've been on that tour, but I've been on the public history tour that does that, you know, and it's very powerful. It's a great critique, I think. We have a really wonderful question in the Q&A here that gets back to that relationship between museums and comics. This is from Evan Carver. Both museum exhibits and your comics rely a lot on physical artifacts, e.g. the security badges they made you wear at the test site. How do you balance this kind of object-oriented storytelling, and I want to underscore that phrase, object-oriented storytelling, with the abstract or discursive components of history, historiography? How can those of us who have to dwell more in strictly textual media tap into some of the engagement potential of the physical artifacts and pictures? And that question really resonates for me, both looking at your work and thinking about the relationship between exhibits and comics, but also in my own experience doing a little bit of curatorial work, but mostly documentary work. I feel like when I'm working in that mode, it's as close to a potter's wheel as I'm ever going to get. You know, my relationship to the material is completely different if I'm doing an exhibit or a documentary than it is if I'm writing a book, even if the book is on exactly the same topic. And I wonder if you've experienced that, or how you kind of think about the epistemology of that and the relationship between these two forms and between the words and the objects.
So that is a really good question. And I'll try to answer it, because like, I don't know if I've actually thought through that much when it comes to comics, but I can definitely think about it when it comes to museums, so I will just be upfront, is that compared to a lot of museum people I know, I am not really an objects person. Like, I am a space and idea and visual person. So I actually, like, whenever I work on exhibits, people are like, maybe we should put some more objects in here. Have we thought about putting some more objects in here? I'm like, no, it's the big idea that's important. Like, and we're trying to visualize it with a lot of different things. But it's a really good question, and something, like, I think I struggle when I like try to switch back into academic writing sometimes, is that I'm used to having all of these tools in hand. Like, you know, I write text and exhibits, but, you know, people don't necessarily read that. But we also have lighting, we have paint colors, we have spatial design, we have artifacts, we have props, we have, you know, there's a lot of different things that we use to build an experience around an idea. And I think, I'm trying to think of I feel like there's a lot of ways I can kind of veer off into a bunch of different areas here. But, you know, like, when you're working textually, it's like, I have an argument. I'm building it on pieces of other mostly textual arguments, you know, mostly other books, but also primary sources, you know, some visual sources, maps, buildings, things like that. But at the same time, like, it's like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good way to explain it, but like, I'm making all of those visible in my work through citations, through things like this. So I am making an idea, but I'm also bringing all of my evidence with me, whether directly or indirectly or anything like that. But I am, I'm basically creating a world of the idea that this world floats around in, and but it is a text-bound world. When I'm doing an exhibit, it's a lot different. People don't, like in some ways, like we're, instead of like taking I don't know, basically like taking an idea and like, here's how I'm supporting it with all of this evidence and all these other things. It's like, here is an idea, and here is how I am like layering this idea through a bunch of different things. Because this is the one thing that we want people to get out of this experience. We know that people are going to come, and sometimes people want to watch videos, and sometimes people want to touch stuff, and people want to do these other things. And so I am creating something, a bunch of putting things together in a way that supports that idea, but in some ways, like the thing is like when I'm like, but I'm also not, I may be creating new avenues of inquiry for people. I may be creating new experiences, but I'm also not creating new knowledge. Like when I'm academic writing, you're actually like, hi, I'm actually moving this argument forward for other people to follow. In an exhibit, I'm not necessarily doing that. I'm taking an idea and like basically exposing it to people who haven't been exposed to it before. And, in some ways, like I'm doing something that's creative, but it's creative in a different way. So I don't know if that is kind of answers your question. I was just like, whoa.
Well, I'm wondering if we could, we only have a few more minutes left. I'm wondering if we could get to the prospects for young people. We did have a nice message from a young man who has chosen, or can't remember, it's an anonymous person. So it's just they, not he or she. That person is a current undergraduate student who has decided to quit the education program and pursue a career in history, research, and museum work. How does this person stay confident with that decision? What could you say to that young person about welcome aboard or move cautiously? But where would you put creativity in that?
First off, I have a whole lot of feelings about this. And I think like, I'm trying to think like one of the things that I feel it's important to point out is one of the reasons that I can do comics is because I have a job. I have like a job that pays like money. I have health benefits. Let me like, I know a lot of people who are professional cartoonists, and like that is not like that makes, I mean, basically any history job looks like rolling around in a pile of cash compared to any like job being like work being kind of an independent cartoonist. So I just want to say like one of the reasons I can't like I have kind of like this, I feel like this mental freedom to be creative is because like I'm not worried about like picking up another course. I'm not patching a whole bunch of jobs together. I am, I have actually a fairly good and fairly stable job in my field, which is like becoming even rarer for museum people because, with COVID basically like lit the entire field on fire. Like my employer laid off 40% of its staff. We had a ton of closures, things like that, and that's for a really well-funded organization. So it's for me, it's hard to disentangle creativity from just the fact that there's like paid work and stability is so hard to come by, because I think like what actually creates like creativity in some ways comes from not having to think about a lot of other things. Like if you're not thinking about how am I going to like feed myself next month or how to pay the rent, you have a lot more ability to be creative. And as we know, like there's a lot of people who don't necessarily use that stability to be more creative, but so that's my reality bit of that. Both as like somebody who works outside of the academy, somebody who hires We've had, you know, like I'm on the hiring end in museums a lot, and we have so many people applying for so few jobs. So my, like, so here's I guess I'm getting into my advice for this person is, first off, the work that we do is really important. Like people, you know, like people need historians, they need people who are creative thinkers. They are, you know, like, as we've talked about before, like history is a way of thinking, it's a way of being around, being in the world. And we, you know, like our world needs that, but it doesn't reward that in terms of pay or stability. So, and I think especially as more, you know, with the, like, you know, like as museums are cutting back, there's even fewer tenure track jobs. Like there is, I will be honest, there is like a part of me just wants to tell people, like, don't do this, do something else. But I also think like that's also not the answer, because, you know, like what we need is more paying jobs. We need better working conditions. We need to actually, you know, revolutionize the both kind of academic history and non-academic history, to think about like actual ways to make our fields more viable for people to join them. So so I feel like that was kind of a non-answer. So I just want to say, so I'll just say, like, we need you, an anonymous young historian, but but unfortunately the field doesn't reward people for wanting to be in it. So
Okay, so I'm wondering, would there be some better prospects? I should say, we have this big Mellon Foundation grant to help young people repurpose their academic skills to reach wider audiences. What if we just woke up tomorrow and there was a new understanding in history department graduate programs, and every course should structure in as something that the students know it's going to be coming. They're going to have a visit with Erin Cole.
mm-hmm.
So they should be working, if it's a research seminar, they should be working on their research papers. They should be doing all of that stuff. But they should understand that part of this course is that there will be a session in Zoom. You don't have to travel. You can just do this. And you can listen to the ideas they have from the research paper. And you can just do just the quickest round of asking them questions that might generate the idea for a cartoon in their mind. And that was just going to be part of the curriculum, is that there is this time where you just stretch the concept of what you have found in your research and what you could do with that. You don't have to stay in there mentoring them. If they get going on something that you think is cool, you could certainly stay in touch. But what if that just became, we wake up tomorrow, and that's part of the training of history graduate students, is in our course, and in all our courses, we always have this session with a cartoonist. And if you get overburdened, then we'll see if we can share that burden with others. So would that work? Could you do that?
Well, first off, I would love to talk to students about cartooning. Second, anything to widen the scope of graduate training that we can do is better. But, you know, like, just again, like, as somebody who is like on the other end, again, it is being on the hiring end, just like, I see a ton of people with amazing skills who go to programs who are, you know, really revolutionary ways of the training. Like, I'm associated with the Heritage Studies and Public History program at the University of Minnesota, which is doing amazing work to train students to do kind of like social justice oriented work. And I want to hire all of them, but that's like, I can only hire one of them, say. And like, so it's just like, in some ways it's not, you know, training is fantastic, and we need to encourage people to think about things differently and think creatively and everything like that. And I totally agree with that. But, you know, it's just thinking about the other end, like, how do you do that and then actually make a living at it, is the part that I think that's the part where, you know, I don't think it's like the training that really causes it. It's the actual like, oh, I can't, what happens when I'm actually trying to find a job, that I think that's the part we really need to fix.
Yeah. Matt, we are getting quite short on time, and I have been monopolizing here, so please.
You have not, but I mean, this just gets me thinking, you know, so we launched a public humanities program here about 12 or 13 years ago, and there have been many revelations from that experience. It totally changed the arc of my career, actually. But But one of the things that I discovered in this process was that most of our students and at least half of our faculty had all kinds of talents and skills that nobody knew about, and that there was no occasion to put to use. And it was just kind of amazing. It was kind of amazing to realize the untapped potential of our own community in that way, and then to kind of make a space for it. So I'm a real fan of trying to bring with us all of the talents. I mean, I think that I've said this before, and I will keep saying it. I think that most people's experience of grad school is that they're being told they should be something they've never been before. And I really think it's all about figuring out how to make the profession, the institution, the historical work carry the person that you've always been. And that if you're able to do that, your work's going to be better. You're going to be a happier person. You're going to be bringing more to it. I just think it's a really important, but almost a lost piece of the way that grad school is put together right now.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I feel like one of the things I do like about museums and stuff like that is I can kind of be more myself than I was able. I'm just wasn't really happy. Let's pick apart a book. All right, well. But just being able to work in a place where I can have a visual sense, I can think about things emotionally. People in museum, I've noticed that sometimes when I was more immersed in academia, people are like, what, you have a hobby that isn't being an academic? What? But in museums, people are just like, hey, cool, you do something great. Maybe we can work with that at some point. So there is a lot of more, in some ways, the same kind of structural issues that you have in academia, you have in museums when it comes to kind of race and gender and class and other things. But I think there is kind of this more hey, you do something really neat. Maybe it's baking weird pies or, knitting for your dog, but maybe we'll use that skill at some point. And I really do find that, that when I'm able to draw on things I'm good at, whether it's drawing or making an exhibit or something like that, I do actually feel like I'm contributing something to the field in ways that I wouldn't if I was here is my article about zoning in Denver. So I think it's true. We don't actually reward people for being themselves, and we don't reward all the things that come with being a person. That we all have those things, but academia is kind of interested in the footnote part of your brain. When you're you're a ball of meat with feelings, but academia wants this part, the footnote part. So
we're almost out of time. We do have our wonderful friend Alita, who asks if there's efforts made to make your cartoons or other cartoons accessible to the visually impaired. Are there ways in which they can be, have people do three-dimensional things or Braille things? And then if you did want to say anything about how your adventures with your own, with the brain who appears in the comics, if you wanted to say anything about that as a life experience that, and you do mention it in the thing. So if you want to say, why did the cartooning thing really come to the fore at a certain point, you might say that, but how about the visual access or the access for people with visual impairment?
This is we only have 1 minute left. Is that for now or for the Q&A?
Well, we're going to go over to our group discussion. Well, we go to a different zone. So really the last question for you is whatever you would like to say is, but if there is something about how you took up this form of your character that had been there from when you were a kid, but as you said, it went on leave for a while. So the reactivation of it, I guess, is what I'm particularly interested. If we had just the minute, and then we'll be going over to the discussion section.
The minute version.
Everyone should.
The minute version of it is if you notice the brain blob in some of my comics, about at this point 5 years ago, I had a traumatic brain injury. I fell and hit my head on some ice, and I was already drawing cartoons by this point. I gotten back into it, but it really limited my ability to both read and write, which are still sort of affected. But drawing was the easiest way to communicate what was going on with me, and so I created the little blob character named Little Brain to kind of kind of an explore, a kind of a stand-in for my emotional and mental states. And so all of the cartoons that I have around with a little blob in them are all about mental things or emotional things, or the idea of like, living with a chronic illness or disability. So that kind of, in some ways, that really changed the way that I drew. I mean, my drawing became much more simple, much more straightforward. And then but it really changed the focus of what I was doing. So.
Right. Well, thank you for telling that, because I do think that is just a really crucially important and inspiring part of all this, is to have I grew up in Banning, California, and it snowed once every 5 years, and I so hate ice to this moment. And so to know what ice tried to do to you, and to see how you just said, I don't think I'm going along with that. I think that is spectacular. And you were legendary. I knew of you, and then there we appeared in the Zoom program at the Western History Association gathering of some kind there, and I thought, oh, there she is. So, and I thought, oh, you got a little sidebar chat thing from me saying, we should do something with you sometime, huh? We should do that.
Mm-hmm.
So hooray for Zoom. We'll just,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really very grateful for that. And I'm so glad that you are legendary, and that you are, of course, as one of the people in the chat said, of course you're an historian. I mean, really, if you're not, the rest of us are going to wander the world looking for a home at some way. So thank you so much, Erin. And now those of you who'd like to join us, you should have the chat information. Not in the chat, you should find the information to go to our Zoom thing. And Matt, you wanted to speak here.
Yeah, no, I was just going to make sure people understand. So in the chat, and I think in more than one place, the information about the next Zoom room is pasted in there. You can follow that link. It will take us to what we think of as a reception space, where we can all see each other, and then we can have open discussion and more question and answer. So we will see you there in a minute or two.
Right. And then we have
Thank you.
Jane adding the line here. I love bus full of historians. I would say, if you're on the bus, you're a historian, which is a wonderful. Thank you, Jane. Thank you for all the help you gave me on the Denver book too. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.